Well, there's a hole in my bucket. Here we go.
Speakers, stop.
There's a hole in my bucket. Dear Liza, dear Liza. Mr. Griffiths is laughing here. There's a hole in my bucket. Dear Liza, a hole. Then mend it, dear Henry, dear Henry. Then mend it, dear Henry, mend it. With what shall I mend it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I mend it, dear Liza? With what? With some straw, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. With some straw, dear Henry, some straw. But the straw is too long, dear Liza, dear Liza. But the straw is too long, too long. Then cut it, dear Henry, dear Henry. Then cut it, dear Henry, cut it. With what shall I cut it, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I cut it? With what? With some scissors, dear Liza, dear Liza. With some scissors, dear Liza, some scissors. But the scissors are too blunt, dear Henry, dear Henry. The scissors are too blunt, dear Henry, too blunt. Then sharpen 'em, dear Liza, dear Liza, dear Liza. Then sharpen 'em, dear Liza, sharpen 'em. With what shall I sharpen 'em? What you laughing at? Dear Henry, dear Henry. With what shall I sharpen 'em, dear Henry? With what? With a stone, dear Liza, dear Liza. With a stone, dear Liza, a stone. But the stone is too dry, dear Henry, dear Henry. The stone is too dry, too dry. Then wet it, dear Liza, dear Liza. Then wet it, dear Liza, wet it. With what shall I wet it, dear Henry, dear Henry? With what shall I wet it, dear Henry? With what? With some water, dear Henry, dear Henry. With some water, dear Henry. With water. With what shall I carry the water in, dear Liza, dear Liza? With what shall I carry the water in? With a bucket, dear Henry, dear Henry. With a bucket, dear Henry, a bucket. But there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in my bucket, a hole. Thank you very much.
I got paper out now. Go paper out now.
Everywhere we go, everywhere we go, people wanna know, people wanna know who we are, who we are, and where we come from, and where we come from. So we tell them, so we tell them, we are the bishops, we are the bishops, the mighty, mighty bishops, the mighty, mighty bishops. Bishops.
That was crap. Right, don't forget the people who haven't paid the money in the morning to Mrs. Roberts. Don't forget your treat.